Hello everyone, welcome to another Odd Commander deck tech. A Secret Lair Super Drop was revealed this week with a bunch of new commanders based on characters from PlayStation games. This set of cards really resonated with me and my love for gaming, so I couldn't help but build one of the commanders that made me the most excited out of the bunch, and maybe I'll build another one here for next week's episode. Let's talk about Aloy, Savior of Meridian. Aloy costs 3, a green and a blue, is a legendary creature human warrior, has vigilance, reach is a 3/5, and says whenever one or more artifact creatures you control attack, discover X, where X is the greatest power among them. And if you're not familiar with Discover, this was a mechanic that came out in Lost Caverns of Ixalan that allows you to dig through your deck until you find a spell that costs less than or equal to the number of X, and you can cast it without paying its mana cost, or you can put it into your hand and put the rest on the bottom. It's kind of a fixed version of Cascade. Aloy is pretty unique because she's a commander that cares about artifact creatures in Simic, which is not really the first color pairing, nor the second, that you would think of when it comes to artifacts. In fact, green is one of the last colors that has anything to do with artifacts in all of Magic. Looking around at some others to make artifact decks, most of them have something to do with clues or food or some kind of artifact token synergy, but here really what we want is big artifact creatures, something that is best done through non-token artifact creatures, which is not a strategy that a lot of these Simic decks do. And then she has that crazy Discover X ability, so we're going to try to load up our deck with big creatures and cheat them out with other big creatures to win us the game. Our ultimate win con is Blightsteel Colossus, a card that I normally wouldn't put into a lot of decks because of how salty it makes your opponents, and maybe one day I'll talk more about my commander philosophy when it comes to cards like this. I've justified putting it in this deck for 2 reasons. First, it's part of a bundle that Aloy is in, so it's flavorful. And second, I feel like our game plan comes with a certain amount of luck attached to it. We're not planning on going and finding Blightsteel and then casting it. We're most likely going to hit it off the top with that Discover effect, and in order to do so, we're going to need some big creatures already, so we're already going to be threatening on the board. So I feel like it's not going to be a very salty moment when that hits the battlefield, more impressive than anything. So let's get on with the deck tech. Let me show you what I've got. First off, we need some big and beefy artifact creatures. Let's talk about those. Ancient Stone Idol is a classic commander card. It's really easy to cast if you're playing against or with a big board state, and it makes another less powerful version of itself when it dies. Colossus of Akros takes a lot to get it going, but hopefully we're discovering into this, and then we're able to reserve the mana to make it a 20/20 Trampler with Indestructible. Darksteel Colossus is the counterpart to Blightsteel Colossus, and not the last Colossus that we'll put on this list. It's obviously not as good, but it's still a very powerful asset in this deck because of the discoverability. Diamond Weapon can come down for cheaper if we need to, but it also has the benefit of being immune to combat damage, which is great because we're going to be swinging with it to get the discoverability. Maelstrom Colossus is only a 7/7, which is on the small side compared to these other ones, but it has Cascade, which means we can get another card on top of it and makes discovering into it really worth it. Metalwork Colossus is the last of the Colossuses on the list. It's also really easy to cast, and it's really easy to recur as well. Probably one of the easiest cards to cast in the entire deck. Omega Heartless Evolution is another big Final Fantasy creature. It has a great stunning ability for when it enters, and it can deal with some less desirable creatures, so it's pretty good interaction. Phyrexian Triniform is a fantastic target to Encore, and being a 9/9 for 9 is really great. And last we've got Wormcoil Engine, which isn't as big as these other ones, but it's an all-star in the format and a great thing to have swinging with us. We could include a lot more here, since we know that there are a ton of really cool big artifact creatures, and we do have some other creatures that can get big, they just don't start big. But I wanted to leave this deck open to some more flexible strategy space. We'll visit that in a minute, but I first want to touch on some cards that care about us having big spells and big creatures. First is Emoti, Celebrant of Bounty, which gives all of our big spells Cascade, so it's just continuing that theme of digging through our deck and getting free spells. Nature's Rhythm looks like a normal creature tutor, but the really nice thing is that Harmonize casting cost lets us use the power of one of our creatures to reduce it. That's going to make it really easy to get another huge creature out there really efficiently. Return of the Wildspeaker and Traverse Eternity are both great at drawing a bunch of cards for having big creatures. Simic Charm has some flexibility, but the main mode is pumping up a creature by 3 for a turn to get some extra power for discovery. Some creatures that will get us right over the edge of being able to cast basically anything in our deck. And last, I've included Titan's Presence, which is a powerful removal spell if we have one of those big creatures stuck in our hand. The bread and butter of this deck is artifact synergies. Ultimately, we want to have a bunch of artifacts out, and we already highlighted the heavy hitters here, but we have a lot of other artifacts and a lot of cards that care about artifacts that are going to be critical for our success in this deck. First, let's talk about card advantage. Canoptek Spider, Shimmer Dragon, and Padim, Console of Innovation, provide us with ways to get draw by playing or tapping artifacts or just having artifacts already in play. Universal Surveillance lets us tap artifacts for card draw on a one-time basis. Thoughtcast and Thought Monitor draw us cards and are cheap to cast if we have a bunch of artifacts. And Reality Heist is super efficient with lots of artifacts and gets us even more artifacts off the top. Next, there's Ramp. Archway of Innovation gives any spell Improvise, which lets us tap our artifacts to reduce the cost of our spells. Ethereum Sculptor and Foundry Inspector both reduce the cost of our artifacts. We also have a bunch of artifact lands with Darksteel Citadel, Tree of Tales, Seed of the Synod, and Tanglepool Bridge, all providing mana at very little downside to increase our artifact count. We also have Uthros, Titanic Godcore, which provides us a bunch of mana for having a bunch of artifacts, and it's not going to be hard to station it because we have a whole bunch of big creatures. We have a couple of recursion and tutor pieces here. Buried Ruin gets us an artifact back once, and Scrap Trawler is really great at getting artifacts back multiple times whenever they go to the graveyard. Then we have Scour for Scrap, which is both an artifact tutor and a recursion piece that can do both at once. And Scrapyard Recombiner that helps us find a construct such as Metalwork Colossus and get us started on the big creatures. Tezzeret, Cruel Captain, and Urza's Saga are both great at finding small artifacts, which we'll mostly just be using for ramping, and both of these cards also have other great uses such as getting a strong artifact creature token out that scales with the number of artifacts, or untapping an artifact and adding counters to it if it's a creature. That's very relevant ability from Tezzeret. Simulacrum Synthesizer falls into the same category as Urza's Saga, that gets us a big token whenever one of our big artifacts enter, and Karn Scion of Urza can get a couple of these tokens out, and it's primarily why it's in the deck. Kappa Cannoneer and Liberator Urza's Battlethopter don't come in as big creatures, but they will get big for us already doing the things that our deck wants to be doing, and eventually they'll be contenders with the other big artifact creatures and getting us that discover trigger. A couple more pieces that fit in the artifact synergy: we have Encroaching Mycosynth that makes all of our non-land permanents into artifacts, including the ones in our deck, Phyrexian Metamorph and Sculpting Steel that can copy artifacts, and Tomb of the Spirit Dragon that can provide some good life gain for having a bunch of artifact creatures. Now, we have a bunch of big creatures that we've highlighted already, but we can make some of these smaller artifact creatures into big ones by using pumping effects, or we can make our big creatures even bigger. These will all help with either pumping themselves up or pumping up other creatures. Beastmaster Ascension synergizes with our attacking synergy, gets us a +5/+5 buff really quickly. Hangerback Walker can put counters on itself and can be coming in big if we have a lot of mana. Karn's Bastion adds a bit of proliferation in here for things that already have counters. I didn't lean heavily on proliferation in this deck, but this deck could definitely lean more onto the counter strategy and make big creatures and be really solid. I tried to find some unique interaction pieces that synergize with our strategy, so I've added Repulsive Mutation and Ruinous Intrusion as powerful effects that will both make our creatures bigger and interact with something our opponent is doing, or flexibly we can use it on our own stuff to just control our own game. Silkguard similarly adds counters to our creatures and then protects them for a turn. Solar Array is a handy mana rock that gives our next artifact spell Sunburst, giving it a bunch of counters if it's a creature. Steel Overseer adds counters to all of our artifact creatures every turn. It's a must-have for one of these kind of artifact creature-based decks. I've also added Terrian Soul Cleaver, primarily because it's one of the cards from the Secret Lair, but it also does a lot to make our creatures bigger for better discovery. Our deck isn't sacrificing a bunch of artifacts, so it is relying more heavily on other people's artifacts and creatures going to the graveyard, so it's going to help if you're playing up against treasures or anything to do with the graveyard. Threefold Thunderhulk keeps on making tokens and adding counters to itself by cycling through those tokens. It starts small, but it can get very big if we have the mana for it. Vannifar Evolved Enigma is an interesting card that I feel like wants to do a certain thing here with the cloaking, and you could certainly do that, but you could just add counters to all of your colorless artifact creatures instead, and that would probably be just as well. And last, Zimone Paradox Sculptor adds some free counters to our creatures and then doubles counters for a pretty cheap cost, like a Varel that also fuels its own ability. Last, let's go over the other utility pieces that didn't fit into the other categories. This will be pretty brief. For ramp, we've got Arcane Signet, Soul Ring, Thought Vessel, Thran Dynamo, and the Eternity Elevator for mana rocks. The elevator works great here, again, because we can station it really easily with our big creatures. We also have Cultivate, Skyshard Claim, Solemn Simulacrum, and Farseek, which was another card from the Secret Lair. Normally not one that I would put into a deck, but it does the job for this deck. Our draw and interaction is already pretty good, but to round it out a bit more, I've added Brainstorm to help us with top deck manipulation, Collective Resistance and Haywire Might as removal for artifacts and enchantments, plus Collective Resistance can be a protection piece, and Commit to Memory and Midnight Clock as ways for us to cycle cards back into the deck if they get stuck in our hand and we can't cast them. Universes Beyond cards, especially in Secret Lairs, they can be hit or miss on whether they resonate with players enough for them to want to play them. For me, this bundle was a smash hit, but something like The Walking Dead or Tomb Raider, or even whole sets like Warhammer or Final Fantasy, didn't excite me as much as these. I was super excited to see characters from some of my favorite video games show up on Commander cards. What do you think of these Secret Lair drops? And what do you think of this build? I'm excited to see how it comes out swinging with some big and beefy artifact creatures and just have fun with the free spells from the deck. Definitely a more Timmy deck, but one that sounds like a lot of fun. Let me know in the comments what you think, and I'll see you in the next one.